Welcome to Devotionables, brief devotions for busy people. I'm Rob Patterson. Because of the cooperative program giving of our church, I have the joy of serving as the evangelism team leader for the Kentucky Baptist Convention. Our text for today is Psalm 43, a very brief and yet a very powerful psalm, which makes it perfect for devotionables. It's only 5 verses, so let me read Psalm 43 in its entirety, and then we'll come back and try to make a few practical applications for our day. Psalm 43, the psalmist pleads, "Vindicate me, O God, and defend my cause against ungodly people. From the deceitful and unjust man, deliver me. For you are the God in whom I take refuge. Why have you rejected me? Why do I go about mourning because of the oppression of the enemy? Send out your light and your truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy hill and to your dwelling. Then I will go to the altar of God, to God my exceeding joy. And I will praise you with the lyre, O God, my God. Why are you cast down, O my soul? And why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God. For I shall again praise Him, my salvation and my God." Perhaps today you find yourself like the psalmist in turmoil. Maybe your soul is cast down within you. All of us go through difficult seasons. There are those times in our lives when we feel absolutely hopeless that we can change or even influence the circumstances that may feel like they're crushing down upon us. Psalm 43 teaches us that if we will choose to hope in God, it can bring exceeding joy even amid great difficulty. First thing that we see in our text is that hope is an act of the will. It's so incredibly helpful, I think, to watch the psalmist's progression of thought through these 5 verses. It seems like he's thinking out loud. He's preaching to himself, which is something we all sometimes need to do. He's encouraging himself to do the good that he knows he ought to do, to believe the right thing in this moment. And all of that thought culminates, verse 5, when he says to himself, hope in God. You see, hope's an act of the will. And when our choices become incredibly hard, we have to choose to hope in God. But we can because our hope is rooted in the character of God. It's grounded in who God has revealed Himself to be. The psalm begins in verse 1 with the psalmist pleading, "Vindicate me, O God, and defend my cause." The psalmist knows that God is truthful and just. And so when he's suffering attacks from the deceitful and the unjust, he knows he can bring that cause to God. Now, I want you to notice in the text how quickly, although the person remains unnamed, notice how quickly the psalmist moves from the very general of saying, "Defend my cause against ungodly people," to the very specific, "From the deceitful and unjust man, deliver me." This is a personal attack. And those are the wounds that hit us the deepest. When the attack, the betrayal, the breach in relationship is from someone close to us. In this case, they're not interested in what actually happened or the facts or our intent or our motives. It reads in the psalm, they're intentionally being deceitful and twisting the circumstances in a way for their good and for the psalmist's harm. No wonder in verse 2 he describes himself as going about mourning because of the oppression of the enemy. It's hard when we're feeling that kind of a weight of oppression in our lives to not project that back on God Himself. And we hear the psalmist groaning, "You're the God in whom I take refuge. Why have you rejected me?" Now David knew God had not actually rejected him. That would be entirely inconsistent with the character of God, inconsistent with the promises he had received from God, inconsistent with everything he had learned to be true about God right up to that moment in his life. But we totally understand why he felt that way in the moment. He couldn't feel any other way, and you're going to have times when you feel that way too. It's why our hope has to be rooted in the character of God, and it's why we are reminded that hope is requisite. It's requisite for holy living. I love how right in the middle of the psalm it begins to shift. And David in Psalm 3 begins to ask God, send out your light and your truth. Let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy hill and to your dwelling. You see, the worst possible time to follow your heart is when you're heartbroken. And David, understanding that, wisely begins to turn his focus away from the hurt that he's feeling, away from the things he has no control over, the behavior of other people, and he turns his focus instead to what he could control, his own attitude, and how he was going to respond in that particular moment. And David begins to ask God that God would lead him and God would guide him to know how to respond and how to respond in a way that would be honoring to the Lord. You know, it would have been really easy for David to have gotten right down into the muck in this situation, to have tried to have avenged himself. And there were those around him who most certainly would have told him, David, you're in the right. And they would have said, you're justified. They would have cheered him on, particularly Satan. And we're tempted to do the same. We're tempted to avenge ourselves. We're tempted to respond in kind, even though we know that's not what God would have us to do. And so we also have another temptation. We may not lash out, but sometimes we're in difficult seasons or we're having hard relationships, we will withdraw. And we'll begin to isolate. We'll begin to insulate ourselves from other people. But verse 3 reminds us in these difficult moments, that's when you've got to actually lean in. That's when you've got to pray and open your heart honestly with the Lord. That's when you've got to lean into His Word where you'll find light and truth and guidance to know how to live in that moment. We've got to lean into the fellowship of God's people. And if we're able to do that, we find that hope begins to restore our joy. Verse 4, David says, then I will go to the altar to God, my exceeding joy. And I will praise you with the lyre, O God, my God. Wow. Friends, could I say to us, just that one phrase is worthy of some serious meditation today. To God, my exceeding joy. Oh, that we would be found every day longing that we could somehow find our way to the altar where we find our exceeding joy in God. But what hope there is in knowing when everything else has been stripped away from us, when the best we can do is come limping in our brokenness to the altar, we will still find there exceeding joy in Jesus. And we need to be reminded today that whatever in your life is bringing joy today, that's a gift, a gracious gift from the Lord. And we regain that perspective, we find that hope rescues our souls. Verse 5, the psalm culminates with David now kind of shifting and saying, why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you in turmoil within me? Hope in God, for I shall again praise Him, my salvation and my God. Might be hard to praise right now. Might have difficulty finding, but I know I'm going to praise Him again. Why? Because my hope is rooted in the character of God, who is my salvation. Beloved, whatever difficulties you're facing today, I pray that you will choose to hope in God.